Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much all for being here today, and welcome to What It Takes series event, What It Takes to Work in the City, actually. So these events are created to motivate and inspire all of you young students and alumni, because obviously we have here a really good panel that will tell you how they succeeded and how they overcame their barriers. So we have Elliot, Shane, Irina, and Ray, and a big round of applause for them, and thank you very much for being here tonight and taking the time. This event will be co-hosted by me, Maria, and Mario, and we are from Westminster Business Consultants, the junior enterprise of the university. So starting with the panel of discussion, I'm just going to pass on the next slide. Oh, amazing. Thank you, Mario. You also have there a code for slido.com for those of you who don't know. You can submit your question there anonymously in case you don't want to raise your hand. But of course, do feel free to raise your hand and ask as many questions as you can. So starting with the panel. So could you tell us a little bit about your time at the university and what were your thoughts about your career prospects at that time?
Are we going to go from the right? Okay, so when I was here at university, it was a scary time because I started with business and management and I didn't even know I even wanted to do finance. Like I did my modules and then one module came up and I thought, you know what, this is for me. And then from that and from seeing the Bloombergs, first time I saw a Bloomberg, you know, flashes, oh my God, what's happening? People are making money, sell, buy. I thought, you know what, that looks interesting. So that's why I went into that sort of career path.
For myself, when I was at university, I think I had a fairly good idea of what I wanted to do, perhaps a little bit differently to some. I'd probably done or completed 4 or 5 internships. Actually, by the time I'd even got through sort of first year of university. So I knew exactly that I wanted to work in finance, I wanted to do something in investments, and I was very clear with myself with that. I don't think I really was contemplating or capable of any other industry, actually. So I remember being at university, being in the halls of residence, and actually having a Bloomberg Anywhere in my halls of residence, which I was so thrilled and excited about. It was the coolest thing that I was showing everybody and nobody else cared about. I was that was one of the highlights. One of the highlights of my university was getting hold of a Bloomberg Anywhere subscription and playing around with that and playing around with stocks and basically spending probably most of the 3 years I should have been studying, but I actually spent the time playing with Bloombergs and playing with, you know, things outside. So that's sort of what I remember of university, just being, you know, sort of a bit of like a kid in a toy shop playing with all these things that I didn't really know what I was doing, but I had fun sort of trying to work it out and trying to learn.
I think my experience has been quite polar opposite from yours, Shane. I came to university in 2005 as an international student, so new country. I wanted to study HR, funny enough. No idea why, but there you go. Then second year I decided, no, I like numbers, I'm doing finance. And then suddenly realized finance is about 100 different fields. I mean, which one do you pick? What do you do? And I found the teachers really helpful in this respect. A lot of it is trial and error. A lot of it that I remember was researching career paths until I was blue in the face because I didn't understand half the things they were talking about. But teachers helped, and putting in the hours helps, and just experimenting and learning as much as you can, even if you think it's unrelated. But that's what I remember from the first 3 years of being here, just a lot of random information thrown at me, and just picking the ones that resonated.
Right. Shane, I was quite impressed by your Bloomberg term. Yeah, we were flatmates in the halls of residence, actually. So did I know I wanted to go to finance on my first day at university? Well, my first day at university was in 2008, and it was the day that Lehman crashed. So did I want to know that I wanted to go into finance? I was like, oh, not really. I mean, to be quite honest, in university, I did a whole range of things like statistics, marketing, all sorts of things like you do in the first year, because you get a wide variety of things. But I still knew that I did want to go into finance, because before coming to university, I did an internship at Mashreq Bank in Dubai. It was great. I mean, I liked the culture, I liked how people worked, and I liked the content itself. I got an opportunity to work during my university time, at least during the summertime, at Standard Chartered for 2 summers. One doing client coverage, the other doing structuring. 2 completely different things altogether. One more technical than the other, structuring being that. And then I got more of an idea that I do want to go into this field. But honestly, I think there were a lot of ideas that hit me at this point of time. You know, I want to go into marketing, I want to do this, I want to do that. It's only in your 3rd year that you actually shape yourself up to say, yeah, I want to go into this field. So it's a process for me, at least, and I think it'll be a process for a lot of you as well. So if you don't know what you want to do at this point of time, it's completely normal. I mean, people still don't know. People still work in my bank, and they still don't know what to do with themselves. So, you know, honestly, I think for me, it was a process, and I think that was my experience of the University of Westminster.
Thank you very much. I think it's all a really good advice that we can take to take the most out of these resources. And the next question would be if you could tell us slightly more about you and your current role, and why is it essential for the organization you are working for?
Or why we're essential for our organisation.
I would say you and the role. Both.
Okay. So my name's Elliot. I work for Kleinwort Hambros, which is basically a private bank. And what a private bank is, it takes people that usually have money in excess of $1 million, for example, and then we take it and then we control and then we invest that money in the stock market in advisory or a discretionary basis based on different risk categories. We currently have around 16 billion assets under management. My role specifically is I do a lot of research for the CIO, the strategy teams, and then I sit within Global Investment Committee on one of the teams there, investment strategy, and then also another smaller board for just smaller investment strategy stuff. How do I fit? In what I do, I automate stuff. So anything that I build, it's not built once. If you want something run, let's say, for example, spreads on an index or, fixed income related stuff, I can build it and I can build it better than what would have been there before. And then in terms of one other thing that I do build every single month, it's about 400 slides, and it goes over everything what happened in the economy. Global macro, commodities, FX, fixed income, hedge funds, and then that is used when a client is within a relationship manager, and then that's all the research that I've done, and then it's provided in a little booklet like this. I would bring one, but I just didn't, sorry.
So I work for Citigroup, the American bank. I work in their investments department. And in a similar vein, the team that I work for is actually called the Investment Lab, as in laboratory. So in its core purpose, what we do is we provide investment advice to our high-end clients. So our average client will have $250 million of assets. Sometimes that'll be substantially more. And my role and my job is to speak to these clients and help them to invest that money, help them to manage that money, and give them advice. So that can be as really a very simple ask, like take a pension fund, for example. They'll need to hit a certain return in order to pay the beneficiaries and the liabilities that they have. And they'll ask, well, what do our investments need to be in order to meet this return? And then it can be obviously much more complicated cases where you can imagine large investors, and some of the most sophisticated investors globally, they have very complicated portfolios. So some investors will have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of positions, of derivatives, of equities, bonds, real estate, and they need help and they need advice to manage those portfolios across all stages, from asset allocation to risk management to even idea generation for these clients. So I work across probably anywhere between 5 and 10 different departments in Citi, which includes research, includes quantitative strategy. It can include trading, structuring, basically bringing all that Citi has to offer to try and service these clients in the best possible way. I'll finish there.
So my name is Irina. I work for Lombard Odier, investment manager. This is basically an investment fund, a boutique rather, investment fund that's part of a previously well-known private bank, a Swiss one. What I do is I look after the credit and counterparty and operational risk for the whole of the investment manager side. This is basically, it's a fairly wide role. We look after all the counterparties that we trade with, the whole trading portfolio, the hedging, the prop desks. We assess all the counterparties that we onboard on behalf of the portfolio managers. Any new business models, for example, blockchain, that would come through us for approval. Any new funds that we create, either on behalf of certain clients, for them, dedicated, or perhaps a UCITS fund, an open-end fund that's for the large audience. Their strategy has to come through me and my team, and we assess whether it fits in with the strategy of LOIM, and we make a recommendation based on that. So we also do slightly more number-intensive roles such as ICAP, so the regulatory side of things, a lot of regulatory reporting on both the credit side and the operational side. Lots of management reporting. I think once you get into finance, you cannot escape reports at whatever level. You will always have to do them. And they're not the most glamorous part of the job, but they're an essential part of it. Yeah, that's what I do, in short.
So hi, I'm Ray Venkatesh, and I work for Standard Chartered in their financing solutions and advisory team. I only recently joined this team. We're part of global banking, which is essentially the relationship managers, and our main focus is the corporates. So what we do is we are the link between the relationship managers, who manage the entirety of the relationships, as well as the product partners. The product partners being transaction banking, corporate finance, and financial markets. Our main focus at this point of time, I mean, knowingly or not knowingly, it is debt capital markets, where we actually help our product partners with the funding analysis. What sort of currencies do they need funding, and how much funding do they need? How is this going to help their rating? What they need to do to improve their rating? What they not? Lots of work with models, financial models, and presentations comparing one company to the rest of its peers. It's quite exciting, to be quite honest, and the reason why I feel that my department is very important to the entire banking, to Standard Chartered, is because we add value not only to the relationship managers, but we can also sort of add value to the product partners to make the entire pitch to a client a lot better, or just the overall conversation, give the conversation more direction, and also give it a little bit of oomph to the pitch whenever we actually go to a client. So yeah, that's what I do.
Well, thanks for sharing your pretty much your daily life. I would like to say that if somebody wants to raise a question, please raise your hands. Perfect. Go on. Oh.
Thank you. It's lovely to have you here, and good evening. My question is, basically, I'm an architecture student, and basically we had a site visit project, and for the project we had to visit a site, a construction site, and basically get as much information as we can in order to complete our module. Mm-hmm. So the one we were working with, they turned bankrupt, and I wanted to find out information about how can main contractors turn bankrupt and how you can support them, if so, or how it all happens, because they had internal working architects within the main contractors. So basically the main project manager was the builder basically, and they all went corrupt, like there was nothing left of it. So yeah, that was my main question. Thank you.
Was it Carillion by any chance?
No.
No, clearly not. No.
Specifically to that question, I mean, I would say if you want to know if a company is going to go bankrupt, it's always somewhere in the financial statement. So every year that gets published, and you can always look at certain things around the company. So, for example, if their cash flow, if they've got too much debt, if things don't add up, and you can always, I mean, even if you don't study finance, you can look up any company name, just type in, and let's say if I did want to know if Carillion's going bust, type in Carillion on the internet. Within, on the news channel, it will come up with, hundreds of thousands of analysts who have said this is going to go bankrupt. So, but yeah, it's tricky, and I'm sorry about what happened to you. But
Yeah, I'd caveat that a bit with the fact that sometimes you just can't know. I mean, I was working at UBS, and this was a banking example, but I was working at UBS when Banco Espirito Santo went bankrupt overnight, and it was there one day and it was not there the next, and no one had an actual idea that it was going to happen. We always knew it was slightly off, but there was no clear indication of that. So you can do your due diligence, and whatever you do, even if it's part of your job or you're researching it for an employment or an investment, do your due diligence on those companies. Understand as much as you can about them. Helps you if you stay there, and helps you avoid it if you can. And there are books if you want to study.
Question?
I'm not sure if we have sufficient time, but I have about 6 questions or 7 questions.
One, please.
One at a time.
Keep it
Okay.
one and brief.
I believe the question then would be to Mr. Jocelyn.
Yep.
You mentioned that during your first 3 years at the institution, you were playing around with the terminal.
Mhm.
So just out of curiosity, were you able to decipher anything that was really useful for industry, I would hope?
Bloomberg, I'm telling you now that Bloomberg is probably the most amazing tool that that you can learn how to use. It's probably one of the best skills. Maybe I'm biased here. My committee members might say something else, but honestly, being good at Bloomberg is one of the biggest time savers and one of the biggest skills that you can teach yourself. And I know this because I actually work with someone who was previously working at Bloomberg, and I'm conscious that this is recording, so I'm just waiting for the evening when he watches this on YouTube. But I can say that certainly being able to use Bloomberg efficiently, the capabilities are almost endless. I mean, I thought I was very good at using Bloomberg. And then I had this colleague of mine who joined from Bloomberg, and he's opened up a whole new world of finance and how to do things in finance. So yeah, in terms of like top 3 or top 5 things that you need to know to be really good and to have really good skills in finance, Bloomberg has to be up there in top 3, top 5. And as I said, the capabilities are endless. On that terminal. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that we will go through the agenda, and maybe some of the questions can also happen during the networking event.
Yeah.
We'll give you more chances though. So we left off in what you guys were doing during your daily lives, and another question that came in through a Slido is, that's what you study, which degree, and what courses you do when you graduate matter when getting into finance, and did it matter in your case?
okay, so for my undergraduate, I studied business and management with a pathway in finance and financial services. is such a mouthful, and every time I go for an interview, when I did, you know, they'd always say, "Is that 2 degrees?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." It wasn't. But yeah, so I studied that for my undergraduate, finished here. I then worked for a company called Siemens, which is a conglomerate engineering company. So I was working on their like top leads that came in, to analysing various different things there. Then I did my master's at Cranfield, and then after Cranfield, then went in to the bank I'm at now.
So, so for myself, I did business management as a degree. So I would say that was a pretty broad degree, and I would say that it doesn't really matter all that much. My personal take is that it doesn't really matter all that much whether you have a very specialty focus on finance or not. And the reason I say that is because I do think that a lot of your learning actually comes from your own initiative and your own initiative to actually learn things. So even if you're studying a degree that's not directly linked to finance, that's never going to stop you from learning and progressing yourself in that field. So in my final year of university, even though I was studying business management, I was also studying I also did level 1 of the CFA, which is finance related, and I did all the securities exams as well. So having doing a degree in a certain field should never prevent you, I don't think, from either taking the initiative or engaging on a financial sort of career path.
Yeah, I'd entirely agree with that. So I did, as a first degree, business with financial management here. And then it actually was quite striking that I got an internship with HSBC, and then I went on their graduate scheme. And then on the graduate scheme, I think there were about 25% of us who had anything to do with finance as an undergraduate degree. However, at that point, we were lucky enough that the graduate schemes were quite comprehensive, and we actually had to do a second degree, basically, that was sponsored by the IFS at that point and University of Manchester, that was meant specifically for those of us who hadn't studied finance as a first degree. So that actually gave a lot of background, and had a couple more specific, specialized sort of modules like trade finance and so on. But there was a lot of support at that point, and when you start off with a general degree, you can always specialize later. If you want to do a particular type of role, if you want to go into a more quantitative role, you do a master's in quantitative finance. Like I did, you can choose a lot of routes at that point. But if you are not quite sure, don't let your degree stop you. Whether you study finance or you study media or geography, you can still have options open.
Right, I did the same course as Shane, and after that I actually went on to do a master's at Hull International Business School. I did that in international business, which was more of a very, very wide, it was a very wide spectrum of subjects. A lot of focus on consulting, which was quite interesting, gave me a different perspective of actually what a consultant actually does, because while I did know what consultancy is, didn't really give me an idea as to what they specifically pitch and how they specifically pitch. It was, I think, in terms of learning, there's a lot, you can learn whatever you want, regardless of whether you're doing a degree in that or not. And I think it's for your own personal development, reading anything and everything is actually beneficial, because tomorrow you never know what information might come in handy, even if it's for small talk. Really, it's at business events, it's really beneficial. I mean, you can talk about, if you read about the stuff like what's Tesla doing, what they're creating tomorrow, or what what happened in Carillion. It's always beneficial. So just keep on reading, keep on learning, and that's what I try and do as much as I can. And I try specifically after work, whenever I finish work on a daily basis, I try and ensure that I do something non-finance related, just to give myself that extra dimension. So just encourage you guys to read as much as you can about anything and everything, really. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Dimitri, please.
I was wondering if you could talk us through your daily hours and if you work on weekends frequently, usually, mostly.
I'm a bit scared of answering that question.
Is HR watching?
Yeah.
Cover that question offline, yeah.
Yeah. Let me take. I actually do work quite long hours. Not because I like to, but it's but it's because there's a lot of things to cover. My daily role. So, I think the fact that I also work a lot with the country head of my department. And recently the regional head of Europe as well for my department. There's a lot of things to cover, and it's not necessarily financing solutions advisory. It's very much also admin stuff. Now, admin stuff, when you do things like that, it's not the most glamorous roles. I'm going to be honest. However, it's the fact that you actually get to work with a lot of people who are more very, very senior, very, very sort of. You can understand the way they think. And also sort of, give you face time with them, which you wouldn't normally get. That's one. And two, you would actually, you can actually learn from them. There's a lot of things that, you don't necessarily have to learn, how does this guy actually go and talk to clients? How does this guy actually go and, pitch in front of the clients? Well, what does he do, that's amazing in terms of strategy. It's just the little things. What does he do to actually, manage his time? How does he actually take notes? So these are the sort of things that you can learn when you do all these sort of things. But I work really long hours. I work weekends, some weekends. I mean, recently I haven't, which is a good thing because, well, you need to have a life. But yes, I do work long hours, but I feel it will be beneficial for me in the long run. So I'm willing to put in those hours.
I think I'm gonna break tradition a little bit here and disappoint some of my colleagues, but I do a 9 to 7 these days. There was a time when I was UBS, when I was leading a team. Team management is a totally different can of fish altogether. But when I did long hours, you work until 8, 9, you work weekends when you have to, depends who you work with. Investment banks, I found, are a lot more work intensive in terms of hours and a lot more hierarchical. And there's a lot more of the face time that is incredibly important, especially when you're starting out. I can't stress it enough how important that is, and working hard and making yourself available for opportunities. However, where I am now, it's a bit more of a specialized role. I have a lot more flexibility as well. There's good working hours, there's work from home opportunities, which are sometimes unheard of in banks still, unfortunately. You still have to do your job. Your job is still important, whether you do it from a 9 to 5 and then a 7 to 9, or you choose to do it at a weekend, or you choose to do it from 6 o'clock in the morning. It's up to you, as long as you actually do your job and you do your learning. I think the more thing that I would add is that work doesn't actually stop when you leave your office. Like my colleague said, well, you still work a lot, if not for the company, then for yourself. You still do your CFA, your investment securities exams. You still do whatever other opportunities you find, or you do personal study, or you think about an idea that you want to pitch to your director at some point. But it's still on your mind, so it's for you to manage really throughout your career.
Yeah, I just I just cover that topic broadly for the time being. But if I could just add to that, I think from my perspective, working at Citi, it's such a global bank and global institution. I'll generally be speaking at least once a day, if not more, with Asia, and I'll be speaking at least once, if not a lot more, to the Americas as well. So you're working really on a global sort of time zone, and a lot of the projects that I'll be working on, the majority will involve representatives from Asia, representatives from the Americas. So clearly, in order to collaborate with those team members, you do find yourself joining calls at different hours of the day. I actually wrote down a few things because I didn't want to forget anything. The second thing I wanted to say is that people, as a student, I sort of asked a similar question, like, what are the hours like? And I didn't respect the fact that I do now, that it's not necessarily the hours, it's the intensity of the day. So for me, I can work 9, if I had a day which is, ending early and it's an intense day, I will feel much more exhausted. It could be 9 to 6. And if that day has the intensity levels of some days, I'm, all the energy, can be sapped out of you. Whereas you can work, if you're working in a sort of what I would call like a normal intensity environment until midnight, it actually doesn't feel as bad sometimes. The final thing I'll say is that I do think it's really important to have a diverse lifestyle and to have that outside element to your life, just to have an all-rounded lifestyle. And I always like referencing David Solomon, who's the president of Goldman Sachs. He just succeeded Gary Cohn. And during the day, he's David Solomon, the second most important person in Goldman. And during the weekends, he's DJ Sol. If you look him up, he's a famous DJ, and he DJs in Miami and all over the world. So, and he's, apparently pretty good. But the point is, I'm not saying, being a good DJ will help you in finance, but it probably enriches your life, not to be working, necessarily all the time. It's important to have that all-round just to enrich yourself. It's important to have that all-round sort of experience. I'll stop there because I've probably gone too much. But.
I would say it completely depends. I mean, if there's a project that needs to be done, yeah, you can work weekends, but on the majority, maybe not, but if something needs to be done, it needs to be done. When you're not working, especially if you're young within the industry, you kind of have to push yourself. So you're doing other stuff, like, for example, as been mentioned before on like the panel, CFA. I mean, that takes up so many hours of just a lot of time. So I'm on level 2 at the moment, and even level 1, that was awful to do that. But yeah, so you work a lot, but I mean, if you enjoy what you do, and if you actually truly do enjoy it, then you don't really view it as like, oh, I'm going to work again. It's kind of like, I'm here, it's fun, let's carry on doing what we're doing. So, yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Well, very, very interesting perspective of looking into it. I like the relationship between the intensity and actually the length of the day, for me particularly. So I want to ask, so of course just having your degree, needless to say that it doesn't differentiate you nowadays. When you were at university, what did you do in particularly to differentiate yourself from all this? Thanks.
I would say, so when I was at university, to differentiate myself from everyone else, I found that, at the end of the day, everyone on your course is going to finish with the same degree. So, what can you do to stand out from everyone else? Plus all the other, 120 universities, and you've got different countries. So there's probably, hundreds of thousands of students applying for these roles. So I would actively go out and find internships, use my networks and talk to the people that I wanted to talk to. The thing that you'll learn is when you apply for loads of jobs, there's these keepers of like the gate, for example, like they're called HR, and they don't let you pass. They literally stand there and they say, no, you cannot talk to these people. And it's very hard to get through HR, whereas if you actually openly go out and meet these people. I mean, before I started in this, I worked for Siemens. The only reason why I worked for Siemens is because I worked with the mayor's office. How did I get the thing at the mayor's office? I saw an article. I saw like a little job offer for like the mayor's low carbon prize. Hopefully it's still running and it's some publicity for them. I found someone, LinkedIn them, said, can I have a coffee with you? They said yes, and then that led to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. So really you can just LinkedIn anyone, and to be honest, most people answer. So.
Yeah, for myself, in terms of differentiating myself in university, clearly I had the degree. I think that obviously I did the securities exams as well, which certainly was helpful just in terms of getting a more understanding of the financial and investment industry. CFA was also helpful. Actually started that, as I said, in university as well. Trying to using the Bloomberg terminal again was helpful. I think that if I could summarize, my sort of approach and differentiating myself, it wasn't necessarily any one thing. It was just look at everything, do everything. So, I mean, I remember looking at, I was at on the Bloomberg terminal, which has there's a job search on the Bloomberg terminal, and I remember applying for a night trader role in the Bloomberg terminal and going for an interview as a night trader, which was basically like trading Asia equities. I won't mention the bank. But I was thinking, yeah, I can be a night trader by night, and then I can do my degree during the day. That would be brilliant. So I remember going for that. Obviously, completely flunked the interview because I got asked a load of technical questions which I didn't know. But these were the kind of things that I was doing on like a week-to-week basis, and I probably learned a lot from just going out again, speaking to people. Very good point. I was always trying to meet different people. Sometimes you meet the wrong people. I remember going into a meeting with the CEO of one of the largest UK financial institutions and speaking to him. And I remember, in hindsight now, I look back and I think that he was definitely the wrong person to sort of approach and speak to because he was, too senior and wondering what I was doing in his office. But, there was a lot of instances like that where I had lots of different experiences and met a lot of people, did a lot of different learnings. If I could go back, I'm sure I'd do lots of different things. But the ending message for me, probably when I look back on it now, is just chaos, going in like 20 different directions and learning, making mistakes. And I think that's how I've sort of found myself being differentiated, really.
In a way, I've had a similar experience because I wasn't really sure what I should be doing or what I wanted to do. So I did a lot of different things. I did have a little bit of smooth sailing, I admit, because the internship that I did in my second year put me on a grad scheme for when I finished. So it was pretty much contract signed in my second year, and I didn't really have to worry about anything else. Now, of course, how do you get onto an internship in the second year? That was painstaking application after application after application. A lot of it was my CV, as you always do. I had a lot of activities that I had done from before university, a lot of extracurricular activities, more like during university, a lot of part-time jobs, some of them really unrelated to finance, like selling storage facility. I mean, who does that in finance, really? But you go in there, you do your best. There's always a skill that you can get out of anything. And at that age, any skill you have to put on your CV is a good skill. So you can't really miss that. Obviously, if you can get relevant internships and relevant opportunities, even better. But that being absent, anything will do. And a lot of it for me was in terms of differentiation. Once you apply, once you get past the CV stage, is your interview and how you present yourself in there. And the one thing that always helped me through that and kind of gave me confidence, which sometimes I was lacking, was your technical skills. And I can't stress enough how much it is important to know your stuff, regardless of what level you are. Well, you don't have to know, to be a night trader on your second year of uni. No one does that, really, unless you're absolutely talented and a genius, which some people may be. But knowing more than the average, at the level you're applying to, really doing your best will be appreciated.
So for me, differentiating myself, I only realized how I differentiated myself at university after I graduated. Because after I graduated, I was actually searching for a job. I'd gone back to Dubai, and I'd just moved to Singapore actually after that with my parents, and I was trying to search for a job. And the guy who interviewed me, the person who interviewed me rather, was, we were having a chat, and he said, the only reason I called you in today is because it's not because what you have in your CV, what you did, what you learnt. Everybody has that. The one reason I called you in is because I read what's your hobbies and your interests. And one of my interests that I put down was I used to play for the Westminster Dragons, rugby. And I used to do that. And I was surprised how many people actually looked at that and they were like, yeah, I like this guy, let me have a chat with him. This guy seems interesting. That was one way to differentiate myself. And the amount of times, I've gone into an interview and started talking about something, completely not related to the job. And the amount of inroads you make just doing something like that is amazing. And I also, because I couldn't play all 3 years, sort of in the second year I sort of managed the team, sort of looked at injuries and sort of strategically thought about, how do you actually manage this team? Because there's a lot of things that you don't learn about management. I mean, you do learn about it theoretically, but when you actually put it in practice, and I got a chance to put it in practice in my Westminster Dragons days, especially about management. Surprising, but you learn a lot about player management, how to actually, how people management rather than anything else. So that was the way I chose to differentiate myself at university, or rather, I just differentiated myself like that.
If I just jump in and add that just to emphasize the point on internships and work experience, that is just so important. I can't emphasize enough. And I actually look back on those days and I miss those days a little bit. One of my jobs was I was just sort of sitting at the side of a trading desk, and it was a pretty old school trading desk, and the guy would write a ticket on a piece of paper, give the ticket to me, and I would run down sort of 3 flights of stairs and give it to the trader to execute. And that was just wonderful. That's one of the favorite jobs I've ever had, because I've got so many responsibilities now, and I think back then, all my responsibility was just don't lose that piece of paper as I go down the 3 flights of stairs. And I managed to accomplish that. But that was actually a wonderful experience. I really actually enjoyed just being there, seeing how everything worked, being in that environment, and it's really, really important to do that throughout university, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting. The very different ways of differentiating yourself. So finding a job is a job in itself. I think we can all agree. 300 job applications, and the next thing are 300 rejections, right? So can you take us through your experience of getting that first role, and what did you do when you were depressed, down, when you wanted to give up? How do you motivate yourself?
I said this earlier, but I don't think everyone else heard it, but it's getting rejected from these jobs is like a blind date, and she's constantly breaking your heart. It's just like, but I spent so long on that, I literally poured my heart out on the paper, and you get rejected, and it sucks, but you've got to learn, it happens. I mean, I've been rejected from probably, in excess of maybe 300 places. Even though it's on camera, I probably shouldn't say it, I got rejected from the bank that I'm at now. They rejected me when I finished here. I did my master's, applied back to the same person that rejected me for not reading the Financial Times every day. She's now gone. And so then I applied again, and then I got the role. But I think what really changed for me was so when I started my master's, I kept applying, and they're telling us, apply for this. If you don't get it within the first 2 months, you're not going to have a job, you're not going to have a career. And I just thought, you know what, and I didn't really pay attention to my modules, and I just kept applying. And then suddenly it clicked to me, why am I paying all this money to be at my master's if I'm not actually learning anything because I'm applying for jobs all the time? So then I just said, you know what, I'm not applying for any jobs. And I went to every single lecture, I asked lots of questions, I was more attentive. And then suddenly when I started applying, I was getting more results coming back, purely because my applications were much better because I knew what I was talking about. Before, how can you apply for a job when you really don't know the details that they want? Plus, I don't know why they always expect you, to apply for these things, and they want you to have, 5 years of experience by the age of like 20, which would be impossible, and they want you to learn like 5 languages. So, and then also quickly on one more thing. When I applied for lots of jobs, I got rejected because of my UCAS points. And I thought that was crazy. I mean, I've got a degree, I've got other qualifications, I'm doing my master's. How can I get rejected for something I did when I was 18 years old? So I redid my A-levels during my master's, and so for some of these exams, I had maybe a day to study for it. But I did that purely to get the points to just get past that UCAS point minimum barrier. So yeah, it's possible, but yeah, rejection happens. You just have to deal with it and mend your heart, basically.
Yeah, I'd emphasize that point. I think in my case, if UCAS points was the only thing that was wrong, it would have been plain sailing probably. But yeah, I was rejected from hundreds of jobs, and probably dozens of different interviews as well. And the interviews are probably the ones that are most challenging, especially when you go through, sometimes 5 rounds plus of different interview rounds, and you're right down to the last, person or last 2 people or whoever it might be. Certainly it can be, a little bit disheartening to say the least. But I think it's very good advice that was just given. I think when I was applying for a lot of different jobs, I really wanted to be doing something in conjunction with that. So while it's true that getting a job is a full-time job in itself, you need to be, I think, somewhat active on a related sort of topic. So whether that's, in my case, perhaps studying for the CFA, or doing some pretty low-level clerk job with some investment firm while you're applying for something better. I think just having anything there alongside that you can leverage together with your job applications actually can really help you. So I think, for me, I think the important thing was trying to leverage the internships, leverage the experience, but also leverage what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis in those job applications and in those interviews.
So interviews and I go really long way back, in 9 years I've switched 4 major institutions and a number of jobs within each one, and each one had an interview and an application stage, and but I want to say that it does get better. Now, the way it gets better, and at least the way it did for me, is that as time goes on, you start applying to things that are way more relevant to what you actually want to do and what you're good at. I remember when I was second year of uni and I was applying for internships and then looking around for jobs, and I was applying to things that I had absolutely no interest in, but everybody was doing it, and it felt like you should really have a backup because you're gonna get rejected for a lot of stuff. But as a result, I was applying to audit and tax and all sorts of things that I just had nothing to do with. And then I thought, well, I'm just going to apply to a smaller number of things, but things that are actually I can talk about, that I can, if someone meets me, I will say, this is why I want to, this is what I'm good at, and this is how it's relevant. And actually it starts making sense after a while, and you get a little bit less dejected. I mean, it still happens, especially when you're starting out, but knowing that you have an angle sometimes is more important than having the right connections or, knowing someone who does that. Sometimes just being true to what you know and showcasing that really well counts for a lot.
So when I graduated from my undergrad, I had a little bit of a gap here. So I was just trying to find jobs, and very, very unsuccessful period. But what I did was I had a lot of interviews at that point in time. And I went into the first few interviews that I went into, I came back and got rejected, no feedback, even though I asked. Then I thought to myself, I got, dejected. But then I told myself, okay, right, what actually went wrong in that interview? What did I do wrong? And I just thought of things that, okay, I did this wrong, I did this wrong, did this wrong. Let me change my approach. Let me try this. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But I didn't make the same mistakes again, and that's the one important thing. And after my undergrad, I had an interview for my master's, which I got into, so that was sort of a success. And then after I finished my master's, there were a couple of interviews I had, including the one at Standard Chartered. And I think I echo Rihanna's point to say that you need to focus on what you actually want to apply to rather than applying to anything willy-nilly. Because to be quite honest, you're just going to open yourself up for more rejection, and you'll not know how to deal with that rejection. So just try and understand what you actually want to focus on, what you can actually talk about. But the way that I sort of dealt with those rejections was reflection, really. Reflection, and also trying to change my approach and trying to continuously develop myself and say, how can I do this better? How can I do this better? How can I do this better? And to this day, it's actually worked, because quite frankly, even now, after every project, we have a debrief to say, guys, okay, we did this better, we did this better, we did this better, we could do this better, we could do this better. So I think it's all about reflection, really, and that's the only way you can actually learn and, you know, save yourself from those 300 rejections, to be quite honest.
Thank you very much. Actually, Ray, I was going to touch upon that point of the rejections and what you learned from them. So now you actually have experience in both in the candidate and in the recruiter side, and you might have seen many common mistakes. What are the most common ones? And what would you have done differently about those rejections and mistakes?
What would I have done differently? I think the first 100 hurt the most. They sucked. What I would have done differently, something that I did do in my masters, but I didn't do as much because it wasn't as relevant then, was more like understanding where the industry is going. So, for example, you know, a trader, back then, you know, when they had a piece of paper and, you know, to run around, get to this person, give this, you know, a trader's job is not really there anymore. It's basically been automated. So what I wish I knew then and what I do now all the time is I try and build stuff that is automated. So I learn new things. So I do this thing called Code Academy, and basically I learn Python there. And Python's a fantastic, you know, language to know, and it's basically you can code stuff in multiple different computer sort of like networks talking to each other. And then I also do VBA. So I went on a course, and you know, people can write on their CV, I do VBA, but honestly, when you actually test them, they don't know how to do VBA. But you can literally go on a course for, you know, or even an online course. There's an online master's by World Quant University, and it's a master's in financial engineering, and after I finish my CFA, I'm going to try and do that. But that literally is teaching you everything that a bank is doing currently right now, but in an automated way. And if you can do that, I mean, you shouldn't have a problem. I mean, when you go for an interview, if you can build something that's automated, they'll be really impressed.
Yeah, so the first thing, what would I do differently? You know, I think that you know, I was always quite a quirky individual. I think for interviewers, they weren't really quite sure what to make of me, and that's probably one of the reasons initially why I didn't get a lot of jobs. They said this guy's just a bit too strange, but at the same time, I think that it's important to have that element of authenticity as well. And I really value me as a sort of recruiter now on the other side. The one thing that I really value now is sort of what I feel is like authenticity and genuineness in a person and in a character, because you're hiring that character as much as their skill set as well. So I actually do pay a lot of attention to you know, the sort of person, how comfortable they are, you know, just as a person. So that's the one thing I would say. I was probably very quirky in you know, probably around university time, you know, when I was sort of trying to do things like be a night trader. I imagine that I was sort of too quirky then. And then after that, you know, I think I tried to think, well, what does the bank want, and what does a bank want, and what does, you know, these large corporations want? And I thought to myself, well, they want someone who's rigid, who'll do the job, who'll do, you know, say yes sir, no sir, and so forth. So I remember changing my approach in interviews and in job applications to try to be very rigid and regimented. And I remember thinking, in hindsight now, that was a mistake, and you do need that element of authenticity and genuineness. The thing I definitely echo Elliot's point that when you know, looking back in time, I wish I had perhaps invested even more time. I mean, I always felt like I was learning something, but you really don't appreciate the level of skills sort of needed until you actually get into the job. So I wish I could probably go back in time and refocus my mind a little bit on programming, on Python, on other things, because sometimes I feel like I'm playing catch up now on certain skill sets that I should have been doing when I was in university. I mean, I'm learning languages now, and I think, well, why didn't I do that in university? And I'm doing programming courses now when I should have done that in university. I'll finish by saying that I went to my father last year. And I said, this is a true story, by the way. Went to my father last year and I said, Father, you've always told me education is the most important thing in life. And he said, oh yes, that's true. And I said, you told me it's never too late to sort of finish your education. He said, absolutely. I'll support you all the way. And I said, no, actually, I know you've been out of work for the last 20 years or so, and for your birthday, I've bought you a distance degree learning course in project management. So I've sent him on a degree course at the age of 79 on his 79th birthday. But it's just to emphasize that, if I was going back in university now, I would definitely be doing Course Academy, Udemy. There's DataQuest. There's so many online free learning portals that I'm using now, and thinking, why am I using that now when I've got 20 minutes of spare time in the evenings? Why wasn't I doing that when I was a student and I had, a few hours? So, sorry, a bit of a long answer, but...
Actually, I'll echo a lot of that. I think at university I focused a bit too much on the technical side of things, like the derivatives, the model building, that sort of thing, and not enough on the programming side. And whatever I had from my IT-intensive high school kind of disappeared by the third year of university. So that was all gone. And then the problem is you get into work and it's not really quite so relevant. And then you move up and you have a team, and someone in your team will know how to do it, so you don't have to do it yourself. And you can just ask someone who's reporting to you. So it gets all a bit comfortable. But nowadays I am regretting that I haven't done that more, and that's something I'm looking into for sure. So that's what I would have done differently. In terms of being on the other side as a recruiter, things that I perhaps wouldn't have done or I would recommend not to do is, one, over-engineering your CV. There's nothing more obvious than that when you're applying to anything, because it's easy to tell whether you're doing it or not. And the second one, in an interview, overconfidence. There's a line between confidence and arrogance, and that is sometimes a little bit blurred, especially when you're really nervous. And I'm sure I was guilty of it at some point in some interview or other, and I see it a lot, especially for entry-level jobs. So I'd caution against that, and just be yourselves, really, like Shane was saying. There's nothing more important than that.
I think I echo Hiriana's point to say, yeah, don't be overconfident, and don't be someone who you're not, because I've met a few of those. People thinking they're the Jordan Belforts of the world, they're the Wolf of Wall Streets of the world, and they're not. They really are not. They come to me. They're smart, incredibly smart guys and girls, incredibly intelligent, incredibly technical. But one thing that people don't like is you being a bragger, being a show-off, and just being absolutely like, oh, right, I know this, I know that. You can do this, you can do that. Be authentic, just go in there. Don't be scared. Don't be nervous, because at the end of it's easier said than done, but at the end of the day, the person who's interviewing you, he wants you to be successful. Because at the end of the day, if he interviews you and he thinks you're not the best candidate, he's wasting his time, you're wasting your time. So there's no point being nervous, because nervousness is just literally just stops you from being who you are and bringing out your potential. And I've been guilty of that on plenty of occasions. I still am. And I think just keep it, box it somewhere in your head. Don't be nervous, be authentic, and you'll be just fine.
Thank you very much. So actually, regarding the automation in AI, in a 2017 PwC report, we found that 30% of the large financial institutions are investing in AI, and then 77% expect to adopt blockchain as part of the production system by 2020?
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's very relevant, but from my personal experience, when I was young, I remember going to the sales and trading floor of Merrill Lynch, and I saw about 35 traders. When I went back this Christmas, there were about 3 of them left, right? So my question is, how do you think the industry is developing? Will the most common jobs of risk managers, investment analysts be replaced by robots, or do we still have time before we're taking over?
I think my mic's gone. Is my mic gone? Obviously, the robots have taken over. I think it's not. You shouldn't really fear technology. Yeah, there are certain jobs that have been taken over, and for example, so I'm within private banking, which is still very much relationship led. I mean, you don't really trust your assets within nutmeg or something when you have no relationship person on the other side. So I think still, banking in certain parts, especially private banking, you're still going to have a relationship with a CRM or a private banker or whatever. But I don't think it should be anything to be scared of. You should look to see what really will be completely automated. And if, let's say, if you want to be a trader now, it's very difficult. You really can't compete with some of these AI machines, but you can also do stuff now to basically make sure that you have an edge of building stuff in the future that can be used for some of these banks.
I would say we've got a massive focus on artificial intelligence and automation, and I'm involved in numerous different projects. So I'm just cautious not to say too much. But I would say that the future is definitely artificial intelligence, is definitely automation. I'll give you one very basic example of a report that I run for our most important clients. I ran it for probably about 75 or so clients last year. All the most important clients got this report, and that helped them to make better investment decisions, and that was really a critical part of delivering our advice to them. This year, already year to date, we've managed to, using AI and using automation, using, again, technology and programming, we've done over 3,000. So that's just to give you an idea. 3,000 clients a year to date in the last 2 months versus the whole of last year was 75. So we are actually scaling up using this technology, and it's really transforming the entire client experience. So to your point, should we be scared or should you be scared? I don't think it's a question of being scared of your job getting replaced. You got to be conscious that you're actually upskilling yourself. So something that took me an hour last year, should be taking me 5 minutes this year. So all the time I'm constantly trying to upskill, and I think that's where artificial intelligence comes in. There's very simple things in the banking world that I think it's coming up to speed with technology. If you think about a simple thing like Amazon, you have, if you bought X, you'd be interested in Y. Just think about that from an investment perspective. If you bought, this equity or this bond or this derivative, you would be interested in hedging out your risk in X. And using artificial intelligence, I think the boundaries are even further in finance and banking than they are in other parts of other industries. And then on blockchain, absolutely. I think, it's pretty well covered in the media from Citi perspective that this is an area that, the whole bank is investing in, has invested in, and is developing. Where it'll go, I think the last point I'll say before I hand it over, the challenge with this and with adopting new technologies is that there's so much legacy systems. If you think about, a lot of banks, they were one of the first proponents of IT in the 1980s. And actually, we have software still running. Yieldbook as an example. Yieldbook is a software we use for bond pricing and bond analysis. That was put together in 1986, I think it was launched. And the interface, I saw a training book from the 1990s. The interface looks almost exactly the same as the 1990s as it does today. you know. So you know, the issue with automation and AI is that the legacy systems are sort of preventing banking and the traditional banks from really you know, sort of scaling up. But absolutely, it's definitely something to be conscious of as a, you know, prospective sort of employee. Yeah.
I think this is one of those classic scenarios that you learn in marketing courses and strategy and so on, with opportunities and threats perspective. So I remember one of my previous jobs that I had at an American bank. I was in charge and part of a large team on automating the credit risk models. So what previously needed, you know, 10 people to credit score a company, now we should be able to do automatically entirely. And that actually involves, it's huge fun. I can't stress how fun it is. You build scenarios, you build models, you get to talk to literally everybody throughout the bank, you get to use your technical skills. Implementing something like that requires you to have a very good base knowledge. And it's an opportunity. It's one of the greatest opportunities that you can get, taking something which is legacy, and there are many of those everywhere, and making it better. So as long as you've got the correct skill set and you're up to date on what's going on and the trends, then I don't think it should be considered a threat at all. I think it should be entirely an opportunity, and it should give everybody kind of an impulse to learn a bit more about it, because if you're aiming to do an entry-level, sort of low to medium skill job, you can be sure that within 10 years it's probably going to disappear. But if you want to be a specialist in your industry, or you want to have a wider view, then that's definitely the right way to go.
I think with regards to AI and blockchain, I want to focus on blockchain very, very much, because I think blockchain is one of those technologies, new technologies, that actually improves transparency. And very much, you know, for us as individuals, it helps because it makes payments a lot faster. So it's used in daily life. And I think embracing technology in today's day and age is very, very important. And I think I'm going to resound what Rihanna says, because honestly, I think it shouldn't be looked at as a threat. It should be looked at as an opportunity. And one of the scenarios why we should look at this as an opportunity, particularly in London, is because of the Brexit scenario. I think after the UK leaves the European Union, the one thing it can offer, and it should be able to offer, is incredible infrastructure. And that's the way it can differentiate it itself from other cities like Paris, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, all these other major cities within Europe. And I think building that infrastructure will take people. Understanding that understanding those technologies will take people. And I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities in this field, and I think it should be looked at as an opportunity rather than as a threat. To be honest, yeah.
Thank you very much. So just before we wrap up and pass on to the audience for the Q&A, I have one final question. What would be your long-term career goals, and if you would like to stay in the industry, in the same role, position, or are you thinking of a change?
That's quite a tricky one there. Long-term career goals. So I always have goals and I write them down, and this is something, so I have a mentor within the company that I'm in, and he's, you know, a really nice guy, quite senior. He's happy to sit down with me once a month, which is great. And I write down all my goals. So I've met with him probably about a year now. So like every single month I have, you know, I've had like 20 things on my goals of things to do. And then even just by writing them down and recording, you know, how are you actually doing it? What can you do? And you record kind of your progress. You realize by writing them down, you look at that same thing a year later, I've did all those 20. Now I'm on to the next thing. I'm on to the next challenge. So for me, it's very difficult to say what is your long-term goals. I mean, at the moment, I want to complete the CFA. At some point, I'm potentially thinking about doing a PhD if I find something that's relevant that I really do find interesting in. I do want to progress within the industry that I'm in, become more well-known in what I do. But I think your long-term goals change all the time, and you constantly got to write them down, even the crazy ones you never think you're going to achieve. I mean, at one point I did win an Olympic gold medal. And I found out the easiest way to do it is bobsleighing. You be 4-man bobsleigh team, you be the end one, because you just have to basically get in and you do nothing. But yeah, long-term goals and then, try and achieve them.
I'd certainly, the 2 points I'll add to that. The first is obviously writing down goals. That's something I do as well, and I used to do it every year. And I used to spend probably the best part of 3 or 4 weekends actually writing down all the goals. That's in addition to all the city goals. So city goals would take me about probably a month, and actually I'd probably spend even longer on my own sort of personal goals. And so I used to do that every single year, and I'd have like probably 5 pages plus of city, and maybe even double that on personal goals. And then I realized that, as Elliot very rightly pointed out, goals change so quickly. So I've experimented, I started to experiment with doing 2-week goals. So every 2 weeks I have actually what's called a sprint, which is in technology terms, you have, if you've ever read The Lean Startup, how people develop technology in Silicon Valley is that they have 2-week sprints and they have Kanban boards, and it's a full like project management exercise. So I figured I figured at one point I'm going to try and manage my life like developing some startup app. So I have a 2 weekly shifts and goals that I actually list down myself. So whether that's actually better or more productive, I'm yet to sort of actually work that out. So definitely writing down goals is important for me, and that helps me to develop and helps me just to keep every single day. I would probably reference something and try and tick off some things that are in relation to those. But they change all the time, so very dynamically. In terms of what I want to do, this may change obviously, but since I was 15, I always wanted to work in investments, always wanted to work, with, investing money, managing money. So that's always something I'll do. I think that the interesting thing is that when I look back at university, I, feel like I knew a lot, in some ways, but in others, I probably lacked a lot of knowledge. Just in terms of, I knew I wanted to work in investments, but investments is so granular. It's so specific. You have investments, just within investments, you have, thousands of different roles. Do you want to work in fixed income, equities, real estate? What assets do you want to invest? Do you want to work in risk, or do you want to originate investments? Do you want to monitor investment? It's so colossally big. Longer term, I think, that sort of changes, but certainly, I'll always stay in the investment world, I think.
Okay, I actually find myself quite inspired because I've never written down a goal unless it was for my performance review at work. I think if I did try to write down a goal, I'd lose the piece of paper within 5 minutes, so it's kind of a pointless exercise. And then at work, it always catches me by surprise whenever I have to review my goals because I forgot I wrote them down. I think the way I've managed so far is I've actually always liked being in risk management. I started off because I worked for the CRO of HSBC at one point, and he was one inspiring individual. And I think that's really important, having someone that you can look up to a little bit and say, when I'm whatever age, I want to be a bit like you. I want to know what you know. So a lot of it for me turned into, do I know everything I want to know about this topic? So I worked in credit risk, in operational risk, in market risk. I managed teams, I managed portfolios. I looked at country risk, I looked at derivatives risk. I worked in an investment bank, now I'm in an investment fund. My goal is to add value, I suppose, to this industry, to understand what it is, because actually risk management is quite an underrated area of finance. We're a bit of the underdog here. And I don't like that. There's a number of us who think, well, we can add value, and as long as we understand what we all do and how we work together and we have the right skills, we can do that. So I think overarchingly that's my goal at the end of the day. Whether that takes me to, touch wood, CRO, COO, yep, sure, I'll take that. Won't say no to the 6-figure salary either with the bonus, why not? But all in all, I just want to do my best and learn everything I can.
Right. I would like to be in banking for the near future because it's always evolving. There's a lot, especially my organization. There's always something new happening. There's always something to learn. And my department that I've joined is quite exciting at this point of time. We're in new space. We have a different role. So I see myself working in banking for the foreseeable future. There will come a time though where at some point where I will be like, oh, I think I've had enough of this. And I think maybe 10, 15 years down the line, that's when I feel that time will be. And after that point of time, I feel I'll have enough experience within an organization to actually work in the field of rugby. That's my long-term plan actually. I would like to sort of develop the sport because I feel that sport is, it gave me a lot of things. It gave me a second chance. It got me a lot of friends. I feel that it helped me in ways that I didn't think it would actually help me. So I just want to repay the sport back, and that's essentially what I want to do long term. Try and work for the World Rugby Organization, develop the sports in countries that where sport is not as popular, because I feel that there's a lot of places where people can benefit from the sport, and I feel I'll be doing. I feel I'll be giving back to the sport, as well as doing something for the community as well.
Fantastic. So before we move on to the Q&A, I want everyone to please bring their hands together for the amazing panel, and also to wish you the best of luck on achieving your goals.
Thank you.
I know we have about 12 questions around here. Do you wanna if anybody's got any questions, please make sure you ask them with the microphone. We've got a little bit limited, so make sure that they are specific, please. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Adrian, and I wanted to say to Mr. Venkatesh that we play the final with the rugby team of Westminster next week, and if you wanted to come, you can come with pleasure for your goal.
Who are you guys playing?
We play in Regent's Park in UCL for the final.
You're playing UCL for the final?
Yeah.
I'll come for that.
You've
you guys beat them.
You've got your boots.
I mean, I would love to come and play for the Dragons again, but unfortunately I have one shoulder and one knee, so not really. I mean, I think I've gone. My sporting days have gone, but I'll definitely try and make it, for sure.
Thank you very much for the insights you've given. And I mean, today's session is what it takes to work in the city, right? So what is it really like to work in the city, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of working in a city, and how does the advantages like outweigh the disadvantages? Like, why are you in the city?
The advantages and disadvantages. I'd say one of the advantages of working in the city or working within, you use the term, everyone uses the term the city, when really it's actually like finance is a bit bigger than just the city. For example, we're not in the city, we're in Mayfair. But basically, I'd say the expertise is constantly changing working within the finance field. It's easy to travel to if you don't live too far away. I say the disadvantages of working in the city, accommodation is so expensive. And honestly, I think it's much harder now as a student than ever before, purely because it's like, for example, when I did it, okay, my fees were 3,000 a year. For you, it's 9,000 a year, and it's a serious amount of money when you do graduate. So that's why you really do have to think long and hard about what you want to do, because you've taken a big, commitment. So, but I'd say all in all, yeah, working for the city is great, and it's a lot of fun. And if it's what you want to do, and if you want a challenge, then yeah, I think it's worth it. Definitely outweighs the disadvantages.
Yeah, I'd say again, there's probably some common points that we all agree on, but I'll emphasize that the people is probably one of the big draws that I get. That the quality of the people that you work with. I know finance is a big place, so you get lots of different people, but one thing that's kept me there, in my current role, I think it's fair to say, is the people that I work with. And they're incredibly smart, incredibly intelligent. You learn an incredible amount from them. Not just finance related, but all kinds of different related skill sets that you can pick up from them. As a funny aside, I had the guy I sit next to. He said, "Shane, I got to show you this," and I was like, "No, I'm busy. I'm working on a client pitch or whatever." He said, "No, it's important. I got to show you this." And he showed me a program, and he uploaded a picture of a dog into the program. And then the computer came up and said, "This is a dog." And then he uploaded a picture of a cat, and it said, "This is a cat." And he'd been able to program, using machine learning and neural networks and so on, using Python. This is probably an easy exercise for Elliot. But using Python, he just, uploaded 25,000 images of cats and dogs. And the program now is able to identify what is a cat and what is a dog by fur patterns and other things. And that was on his Sunday evening. So you can just imagine what he does in a day and what kind of things that he shares with me when it's his actual real job. So the people and the expertise is incredible. The sort of skill sets, and it's really humbling for me because I realize how little I know every day that I go to work, and I see what some other people are working on, and I pick up from them. So I wrote down just a couple of things not to forget about it. So the second thing is, I think, new innovations. That's probably the most exciting thing for me, is that I have clients coming to me and investors, and they say, we want to be invested in tomorrow's new technologies. We want to be invested in automation. We want to be invested in fintech, and it's my job to try and really implement those strategies. And I think being at the forefront of something that's not only going to change the investment world, but change the actual world itself, I think is really exciting. So, again, fintech, automation, blockchain, all these things, having a job to research that and review how to invest in those technologies is really exciting. Also, there's also the opportunity to work with global teams. There's a city office just about everywhere in the globe. So if you like traveling, that's something that, is a great way to see the world and work as well. And the final thing I'll say on pros, just to caution that you need passion, to work in the industry. You need a lot of passion, because if you don't have passion, you're going to find it challenging. And I don't think people appreciate that enough. A lot of people take the attitude, well, I'll work, for a couple of years, get a nice salary, which doesn't always happen, by the way. I'll work a couple of years, get a very nice salary, and that'll be that. But you genuinely need a lot of passion for the role, for the job, and for investments, I think, in order to actually do it and get through it. The difficulty I'll focus on, and I'm with any role, with any job, you can focus on lots of different difficulties. But I think the one thing that you probably don't anticipate is the level of questioning and potentially like even critique, that you can get. And that's something that, you're probably not prepared for. You can be working on something for months, and you can feel like this is the most wonderful thing that you've ever put together. You always have to prepare yourself that your work is always critiqued, and always critiqued heavily, because at the end of the day, you're trying to deliver to the client the best possible service. And usually, your best, is always generally told you need to go one step further. So you're always being pushed, and you're always being critiqued. And, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but I think some people can find that difficult. That's it.
Okay,
Sorry,
well,
a bit
sure.
overwinded, but yeah, go on.
I'd echo a lot of that, actually. I think the one advantage is that you always get challenged. The disadvantage is that you always get challenged all the time, whatever you do, whatever you work on, which is good, because you kind of push yourself and you always learn more, and you have a lot of people around who are doing the same, which is hugely important because it keeps you dynamic and active and always learning. one advantage is probably that it still is fairly well paid in comparison to other industries. Perhaps not IT, perhaps it's changing a little bit, but it's not too bad. Disadvantage, the long hours at the beginning, at least at the beginning. Most people probably until they retire. And unless you do an early retirement, you're looking at, 40 years of very long hours? That's quite a sacrifice. I think you shouldn't underestimate that sacrifice, because you can love what you do and you can, I'm passionate about finance. I love learning. If I wasn't learning finance, I'd be learning something else. But it does dig into your family life. It digs into your friends, and you will have sacrifices that you make along the way, and the further up you are, the more sacrifices you'll have to make, and the more you'll have to manage it. So it's all great at the beginning when you have pretty much not much else to do apart from learn and prove yourself. But when you get a bit closer and a little bit further up in your career, you will need to manage that a little bit better. So I'd say get your study in early, as early as you can, even if it means long, late nights, so that you don't have to do it when you're 30 or 40.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo everyone's opinions out here, but I think for me the most important pro is working with different people, and because there are a lot of people in the city, more experienced, more intelligent, and have different ideas all the time, and just seeing how they actually approach everything and just learning from them is just fascinating. I think the cons, long hours can be a con, but I don't think, at the end of the day, the sacrifice should be worth it. I feel that it will be worth it, because honestly, I think it is long hours, but at the end of the day, you learn something from it. And I think those are the main pros and cons for me of working in the city, really.
Thank you very much for that final note. Anybody has a final question? Sorry, somebody.
Hi. Oh, sorry, I was in a lecture earlier, but I just wanted to ask, basically, if what advice would you give to a graduate interested in working in your specific field and the best methods to apply? So, what kind of research and what upcoming areas would be best to focus on?
It's very much what I said earlier, but I don't know if you were here because you're in that lecture. Basically, coding ability is number one fundamental thing that I think can help you. And then again, for example, with LinkedIn, you really underestimate. You can message someone out the blue, and then you can have a coffee with them a couple of days later. And it really can happen like that. And even if you don't get a message back, just keep pinging out messages to people. Because even me, I'm not 100% sure what every single part of my bank technically does. Like, some guy's an exotic, derivative trader in commodity in emerging markets. Do I know what that he does on a daily basis? Not really. But if I send him a message, I can sit with him next week, the week after, have a coffee with him and ask him questions. Same can be done by you if you want to learn more about a company. For example, if you wanted to Societe Generale, good company, you can just ping someone a message, have coffee with them, and they can send you in the right direction.
I think ensure you have some development of at least one or two skills, whether that's Bloomberg or coding. I think there's so many out there. I would just pick one and just start developing it. So skills is an important thing. The second question with regards to how to apply, I think I would apply online and then see who you can reach out to who might be linked to that company, and say, I'm thinking about, or I've already applied, I'd like to get to know the business structure a bit more. So I think meeting people, ensuring that you have a development, some skills development. But the third thing that's probably overlooked a little bit is an area of focus within one or two different areas that you think's interesting. I remember when I was at Westminster, one of the areas was cocoa bonds, like a very specific part of the market, and started looking at these bonds, researching them, and I always had, you know, something in my back pocket, you know, if I needed to interview and talk about an interesting topic that was topical in the news at the time, it was that. So I learned everything about those bonds, how to value them, read all the PhD research papers on the issuance, and knew pretty much everything about them. So I always had that as you know, something that I enjoyed talking about with people. So 3 things, you know, skills, engaging with people, and the third thing, you know, just area of focus that you're interested in, just a topic.
Not sure I can add much more to that, to be honest. I mean, you have to have your technical skills. You need to have Bloomberg, to be honest. Even if you just know what it is and how to use it, basically. If you go into an interview and you say you've never used Bloomberg before, it does raise a couple of eyebrows these days because it's quite widespread. And also, in terms of how to apply, I'd really recommend getting someone to look over your CV. Someone from the industry would be great, because there's a lot of things which you can miss, a lot of things that perhaps you know, but you can't phrase them the right way. And sometimes 1 or 2 words on a CV makes all the difference, especially with HR, the gatekeepers. So, yeah.
I would say read as much as you can. Just read everything. But at the end of everything you read, ask yourself, so what? What's this article about? How's it going to help me? What am I supposed to do with this? And once you actually keep understanding all the news and all the information, you yourself will find your own direction. And to be quite honest, you'll not need, you know, to contact people on LinkedIn. You'll not need to do anything. You'll just automatically go to events where you'll find the right people, and it'll just happen. So just read as much as you can, be analytical, and query everything, and that's pretty much your direction of how you'll actually get into this field. People like people who actually come to an idea logically rather than just, you know, illogically rather. Yeah.
Can I just add one point to that? You don't realize until you leave university actually the stuff that you have, the resources. So for example, to have that many Bloomberg terminals, in a bank, you don't really have that many in one room. They kind of rationalize them, to be honest. So even just being able to walk in there and just play around, and I think there's like a driving license, or there was a test that I did when I was here, which was really simple, and it just teaches you the basic stuff. But even, you know, online papers, if you type in, let's say you're interested within AI, typing that in, you get access to all the PhD papers that I don't have access to. No one in the industry, unless they pay an excessive amount of money, have access to. If you can read it, understand the abstract, when you go into that interview, you basically know a bit more than the guy that's interviewing you about that topic because you've read the most recent thing. So it's a big advantage being at university now, I guess.
But if you do know more than your interviewer, don't brag about it.
What an absolutely wonderful panel that we've had today. Very inspiring for, at least at a personal level. I do want to get into finance. So thank you very much to, on behalf of the students, to the staff members that have organized the event, and to the alumni for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.